Hello everyone. Today I bring you a deep and inspiring story about a family that, upon moving to a new neighborhood, faced unexpected challenges. In search of peace and belonging, they were surprised by prejudice, but with courage and unity, they turned this resistance into a powerful lesson of overcoming. If you are a fan of stories about strength, resilience, and change, subscribe to the channel now. Activate notifications so you don't miss any more content like this, and let us know where you are watching from. Let's embark on this emotional journey together. What happens when a dream turns into a nightmare? Caleb Johnson and his family dedicated years of effort and sacrifice to achieve one of their greatest desires, moving into a house in Charleston, South Carolina. With hearts full of hope and joy, they organized a welcome barbecue, eager to celebrate this achievement and make new friends. However, what should have been a moment of happiness quickly turned into an unexpected battleground. Evelyn Sanders, an influential and conservative neighbor, had watched everything with disdain, convinced that the Johnsons posed a threat to the balance of her community. Caleb, a hardworking and kind man, always dreamed of a home where his family could feel safe and welcomed. The new house, with its spacious garden and a porch that invited long conversations at dusk, seemed to be the perfect place for that. But soon he realized that the reality surrounding him was quite different. The presence of Evelyn and her critical gaze became a constant reminder that not everyone was ready to accept differences. With each casual encounter at the market or park, the tension grew, and Evelyn's insinuation that certain people did not belong in that community echoed in his mind, challenging his determination and his idea of home. Inside, Caleb struggled with his insecurities. Memories of a past where he didn't fit haunted him. He had always sought to prove his worth, not just to others, but especially to himself. Now, as he tried to establish himself in his new life, the shadow of prejudice made him question whether he truly belonged in that place. Determined not to let his family suffer, he decided it was time to take action. He brought the issue to the city council, transforming what started as a simple barbecue into a heated debate about acceptance and belonging. At the council meeting, emotions were running high. Caleb and his wife, Ava, stood up to speak, their voices strong and filled with passion. They laid bare the truth about the prejudice they faced and how it impacted their lives. Caleb's speech, full of sincerity and courage, challenged Evelyn and made a heartfelt appeal to the community about the true meaning of home. The charged atmosphere began to shift as neighbors reflected on their own convictions and values. With support growing around the Johnson family, the community began to unite in their favor, challenging the old ideas that once seemed unshakable. The clash between Caleb and Evelyn was not just about them, it was about the struggle for inclusion, dignity, and the right to belong. Caleb's journey became a symbol of hope, showing that even amidst difficulties, it is possible to build a home where everyone is accepted, regardless of their differences. This story reveals the profound challenges that arise when trying to create a safe and welcoming space, where resistance to differences still persists, but the strength of love and determination can prevail. Caleb Johnson felt a mix of hope and fear. The move to Charleston was supposed to be the realization of a family dream, but as he looked at the faces of the neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, he sensed that there was something more at stake. The welcome barbecue, which should have been a moment of unity, now felt like the stage for a battle. Evelyn Sanders, with her critical gaze and firm posture, represented a mindset he knew all too well: prejudice. With each passing day, the tension grew. Caleb, who had always strived to be kind and respectful, began to feel that his attempts to integrate were met with coldness. He questioned whether he truly belonged to that community. The conversations that once were light and cheerful became heavy and filled with insinuations. Even beside his wife, Ava, and their children, Caleb felt a weight in his heart. He wanted to protect his family, but the external pressure seemed overwhelming. Evelyn wasn't the only neighbor opposed to the Johnsons' presence. There was also Carl, a man who always walked with a suspicious look and who, at community meetings, took Evelyn's concerns even further. He spoke about traditional values and how the change could destabilize the community. To Caleb, those comments echoed like war cries. and each word felt like a direct attack on his identity and that of his family. However, the real battle was within Caleb. He found himself confronting his own insecurities. Memories of his childhood, when he was often bullied for being different, resurfaced. He had always tried to stand out, but the shadow of prejudice seemed to lurk constantly, ready to undermine his confidence. It made him question if he was strong enough to face this new fight. On the night of the council meeting, as they prepared to speak, Ava noticed that Caleb was tenser than usual. She held his hand, conveying encouragement and love. Caleb took a deep breath, trying to muster courage. The room was full, and the eyes were fixed on him and his wife. His heart raced, but he knew he needed to speak. He wanted the community to understand that it wasn't just them at stake, but the future of their children, who deserved to grow up in a welcoming environment. When it finally came time for him to speak, Caleb stood up, feeling the weight of the gazes. He began with a story about his arrival in Charleston, how he and Ava had dreamed of that place, and how each of their children had laughter and dreams that yearned for a loving home. But as he spoke, he noticed Evelyn's expression, which seemed to revel in what he was saying, as if she were preparing for a counterattack. This destabilized him for a moment, but he remembered Ava's gaze and the love of his children, and that gave him strength. Caleb's words were sincere, but also laden with emotion. He spoke about the importance of inclusion and how everyone deserves a space where they feel safe. He challenged the idea that differences were a threat, emphasizing that diversity could be a strength that unites people. What began as a simple speech quickly transformed into a passionate defense of acceptance. However, the response was not what he had hoped for. Evelyn did not merely listen. She stood up, her cutting voice echoing through the room. She challenged Caleb, questioning his intentions, insinuating that he and his family were trying to change the essence of the community. Her words were venomous, and as she spoke, Caleb felt as if each phrase was a knife cutting through his determination. He realized that the fight would be harder than he had imagined. The tension in the room escalated, and voices began to rise. Some people started to support Caleb, but others, influenced by Evelyn and Carl, looked at him with suspicion. Caleb felt the pressure mount, and for a moment, he questioned whether he should continue fighting. Was it even possible to win this battle? Doubts began to creep in, and he realized he was at a crossroads, where the desire to belong clashed with the fear of exposing himself. Ava, noticing the change in her husband's demeanor, stood up as well. She spoke in a firm tone, advocating for a vision of a home that celebrated differences. Together, they were a team, and even in the face of the community's fracturing, the love they shared was an anchor that kept them steady. But they knew they would need more than love. They would need the courage to face what was to come. Caleb looked around and saw familiar faces, some friends, others mere neighbors. He realized that the fight for inclusion and acceptance was bigger than just his family. It was a struggle for a future where everyone could feel welcomed. And although the battle was just beginning, he was determined to fight, not just for himself, but for all those who, like him, had dreamed of finding a home. Caleb felt his heart tighten as the tension in the room escalated. Evelyn's words reverberated in his mind, each phrase like a stone thrown into a calm lake, creating waves of insecurity. He looked at Ava, who stood firmly by his side. Her support was his refuge, but doubts began to gnaw at his confidence. What if he was wrong? What if his presence was indeed threatening the community? As the discussion intensified, some voices began to rise against him. Carl joined Evelyn, making sarcastic comments about Caleb's intentions. He insinuated that the family was unwelcome, that they were trying to impose a new order in a place that already had its rules. Each of his words felt like a blow, and Caleb felt frustration and sadness mixing within him. He knew it wasn't fair, that his intentions were pure. But the anger and fear he saw on the faces of the neighbors began to cloud his reasoning. He wondered if he was truly prepared for this fight. What would happen if the community didn't accept him? If he failed to create a safe home for his children? Ava, sensing Caleb's agitation, tried to intervene with a calm yet firm voice. She spoke about the values they believed in, about how diversity enriched everyone's lives, but the room was so charged with distrust that her words seemed to dissipate into the air. The faces of some neighbors, once open to dialogue, were now closed, filled with resistance. The feeling of helplessness began to accumulate in Caleb. He realized he was fighting not only against Evelyn and Carl's voices, but against a system that seemed unwilling to change. He remembered the conversations he had with his mother as a child about the importance of standing firm in the face of prejudice. But that night, he felt increasingly vulnerable. In the days that followed, the tension only grew. Caleb began to receive cold looks when he went out for walks with his family. The children, innocently, noticed the change in the neighbors' behavior and began to ask why some no longer smiled at them. That broke Caleb's heart. He felt powerless, as if he were failing as a father. The emotional pressure was intense, and he started having trouble sleeping. The nights were long, filled with anxious thoughts revolving around what could happen. Ava, always attentive, tried to be a pillar of strength, but even she began to feel the weight of the situation. One day, while they were discussing the difficulties of adapting, she mentioned that it might be time to seek support outside the community, perhaps to find a group that shared their ideas about inclusion. Caleb hesitated, reluctant to step away from the fight he felt he needed to face. He didn't want to abandon the hope that the community could change. The idea of fleeing felt like defeat. However, the pressure was becoming unbearable. At a parent meeting at school, Caleb met a group of friends who shared his concerns about the environment in the community. They felt the same pressure, the same need to fight for a safe space for their children. This gave Caleb a new perspective. He realized he wasn't alone, and that the fight for inclusion could be bigger than just his family. With the support of these new friends, Caleb began to feel more empowered. But he also recognized that the battle wouldn't be easy. Conversations with the neighbors became more tense, and he realized that the resistance was rooted in traditions and the fear of the unknown. With each attempt to reach out, there was the risk of being misunderstood or even verbally attacked. He felt, more than ever, on unstable ground. The tension culminated in a decisive moment when a community event was scheduled. Caleb decided it was time to speak out again. He and Ava planned a speech, this time with more support and more voices by their side. They wanted to show that the community could be a place of unity, not division. However, the fear of being attacked again loomed over them like a dark cloud. When the day of the event arrived, Caleb felt a mix of nervousness and determination. He knew he was at a crossroads, where the decisions he made could affect not only his family but also the future of that community. He needed to find the courage not only to speak but also to listen, to understand the fears that motivated those who opposed his presence. As he prepared, he remembered the lessons he had learned along the way, the importance of empathy, dialogue, and courage. And, above all, he knew that the love he felt for his family was the reason he was fighting. With his heart racing, Caleb was about to take the next step, fully aware that the path ahead could be filled with challenges and twists. He was ready to face whatever came. Caleb was nervous as he prepared for the community event. His heart raced in his chest, and he felt the weight of all the expectations pressing down on his shoulders. He knew this was his chance to speak out, but the fear of being attacked again paralyzed him. The room was filled with familiar faces, but also with strangers who seemed ready for battle. Ava, beside him, held his hand tightly, as if she could infuse him with courage. She had always believed that change was possible, but Caleb felt more anxious than ever. He remembered the voices of Evelyn and Carl, the disdain they had shown for his family. That haunted him, but he knew he had to move forward. What was at stake was the future of his children, their safety in a place that should be a home. When it was his turn to speak, Caleb stepped onto the stage with the feeling that the world was watching his every move. He looked out at the audience and feeling vulnerable. What could he say that would make a difference? The words began to flow, and he spoke about his family, his hopes, and the desire to find a space where everyone could coexist. He spoke from the heart, with sincerity, but the room felt distant. It was as if he was shouting into a vacuum. However, in the midst of his speech, something unexpected happened. A woman he didn't recognize raised her hand and asked to speak. With a glimmer in her eyes, she shared her own story. She was a single mother who had moved to the community a few years ago and faced similar challenges. Her words were marked by pain, but also by resilience. She spoke about the importance of building bridges, not walls, and how fear and distrust only served to drive people apart. The impact of her intervention was instantaneous. Caleb felt a wave of hope wash over him. Other voices began to join hers, sharing experiences and fears. Each account brought a new layer of understanding and empathy. He realized he was not alone in this struggle. The stories intertwined, revealing that many in the room shared the same longings, the same insecurities. The resistance that once felt so strong began to dissolve, and a sense of community emerged from the chaos. As people spoke, Caleb saw the faces that had been closed starting to open. He noticed some neighbors nodding in agreement, others even wiping away tears. The emotion in the room was palpable, and he felt that a change was happening. However, in the back of his mind, a shadow of doubt lingered. He couldn't ignore the fact that, even with all that empathy, there were still those who would not accept his presence. The fear of failure still hung over him. When the event ended, Caleb felt different. There was a new energy in the air, a feeling that change was possible. But he also knew that this battle was not over. He would still have to face the resistance from some people, the distrust that still existed. However, the revelation that there were allies around him made a difference. He realized that the struggle was not just his, but belonged to everyone who wanted a safe space for their families. In the days that followed, Caleb began to meet with the new friends he had made. They gathered to discuss strategies, to plan ways to bring more inclusion to the community. He felt stronger now, supported by those who understood his struggles. But at the same time, he also had to confront his own shortcomings. He realized that for too long he had closed himself off in his own pain and fear, without opening up to the stories of others. The revelation that everyone was fighting their own battles made him reconsider his approach. The connection with those new friends helped him see that it was possible to build a different future. He didn't have to face the resistance alone. The struggle was collective, and together they could create a more welcoming community. But as this new hope blossomed, Caleb also began to question what success truly meant. It wasn't just about gaining the acceptance he so desperately desired, but about the journey he was on and the lessons he was learning along the way. And so, Caleb's life took a new turn. The struggle didn't disappear, but now he was more prepared to face it. He had learned that even in difficulties, there was room for growth and change. The transformation was just beginning, and he was willing to move forward, determined to make a difference not only for his family but for the entire community. Caleb woke up the next morning after the event feeling different. The weight that had once felt like it was crushing him was now lighter, but there was still a cloud of insecurity hovering over his head. The conversation he had with his new friends the night before echoed in his mind. He realized that, while there was hope, the struggle was not over. He needed to take action, and that made him anxious. As he stepped outside, he encountered a neighbor he hadn't seen in a while. Mrs. Marlene, an elderly woman who always greeted him with a smile, was watering the plants in her garden. Caleb hesitated before approaching her but decided it was time to open up. He remembered the words of the woman who had spoken at the event. Build bridges. With a nervous smile, he introduced himself. Hi, Mrs. Marlene. How are you? He paused and, on impulse, said, I would like to talk about some things happening in the community. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Marlene stopped and looked him in the eye. Oh, my dear, it's always good to talk. What's bothering you? Caleb shared his concerns about the resistance to accepting differences and how he wanted to promote inclusion. To his surprise, Mrs. Marlene not only listened but also offered to help him spread the message. I have always believed that everyone deserves a place. Let's do something together, she said. This interaction brought a new sense of energy to Caleb. He realized that even amid challenges, there were people willing to come together. In the following days, Caleb and Mrs. Marlene organized small meetings at her house. The idea was simple: bring neighbors together to discuss inclusion and respect. The meeting started with just a few people, but with each gathering, more and more neighbors joined in. They shared their stories and gradually formed a bond. Caleb felt more confident with each new voice that spoke up, but the resistance from some still concerned him. One day, while they were discussing how to create a larger community event, Caleb received a message from Evelyn, one of the neighbors who had opposed him before. She invited him to a community council meeting. Caleb's heart raced. He knew this could be his chance to confront the resistance directly. But fear also paralyzed him. What if everything fell apart? He decided to attend the meeting, bringing along the support of Mrs. Marlene and some new friends. When he arrived, he noticed the room was filled with familiar faces, and the tension was palpable. Evelyn started the meeting, and Caleb felt her gaze on him, as if he were being assessed. He remembered the distrustful voices that had hurt him so many times and took a deep breath. When it was his turn to speak, Caleb stood up and, with a trembling voice, began to express his ideas. He talked about the importance of listening to all sides, respecting differences, and building a place where everyone could feel safe. However, the response was immediate. Some council members began to murmur, showing their discontent. An older man, known for his conservative views, stood up and said, "Why should we change? It has always been this way." Caleb felt a chill in his stomach. The fear of being attacked once again almost made him pull back. But he remembered the voices of support around him and decided not to let himself be discouraged. Because the world is changing, and we need to keep up with that change. Our children need to learn to respect and love differences, he replied, trying to remain calm. The conversation intensified, and Caleb realized he was facing a new obstacle: the need not only to be heard, but also to find solutions to the resistance. He knew he needed to be patient and persistent. The fight for acceptance would not be easy, but he was determined to continue. After the meeting, he sat on a park bench, watching the children playing in the distance. The hope he had felt while speaking had been overshadowed by the resistance. He wondered if all that struggle would be worth it. That doubt led him to reflect on his motivations. He was not just fighting for himself, but for a better future for his children. A future where they would not have to face the same fear and distrust that he had. As he thought about all this, Mrs. Marlene joined him. "Caleb, don't give up. Every small victory counts, and you are making a difference," she said, placing her hand on his shoulder. Caleb smiled, feeling a new warmth of determination. He knew that difficulties were still ahead, but now he had allies by his side, and a new understanding that the fight for inclusion was a path he was willing to take. He was ready to face the challenges, one step at a time, helping his community become a more welcoming place where everyone could thrive together. Caleb observed the movement of the children playing in the park, an involuntary smile forming on his face. He was aware that the fight for inclusion in the community would not be easy, but he felt that he was on a different path now. The resistance he faced at the council meeting still pulsed in his mind, but instead of discouragement, he realized that every word he spoke carried weight, had an impact. He was finally allowing himself to believe in himself. When Donna Marlene sat down beside him, he felt a wave of comfort. Her presence, a woman who always believed in the power of community, was a reminder of what was at stake. "You really believe that you can change things?" she asked, with an encouraging look. Caleb hesitated for a moment, but then, with a glint of determination in his eyes, replied, "Yes, I believe. And more importantly, I feel that people are starting to listen." With each meeting they organized, he noticed a transformation not only in others, but also in himself. Previously, he had felt paralyzed by insecurity, but now, with the support of Donna Marlene and the new friendships he formed, he began to see the value of his voice. He learned that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but rather a demonstration of strength. This new attitude helped him open up more, connecting with those who, like him, sought a space where they could be heard and respected. However, the true test of his determination came when he decided to plan a larger community event. The idea was to bring together people from different backgrounds so they could share their stories and experiences. Caleb knew he would have to face the resistance that still existed, especially from council members who opposed any change. But instead of letting it get him down, he saw it as an opportunity for growth. He was learning that success was not just about winning over those who disagreed, but about creating a space where everyone could express their voices. With the help of Donna Marlene and the neighbors who joined the cause, the event began to take shape. They planned interactive activities, debates, and presentations that celebrated diversity. Caleb was surprised to see how many people were willing to collaborate, bringing their own stories and experiences. He realized that by opening his heart and accepting help, he was building a true movement for inclusion. On the day of the event, Caleb felt nervous, but also excited. He remembered all the times he had felt insecure, the pain of cutting words and rejection. But now, he was surrounded by friends and supporters. The park was filled with laughter, conversations, and a palpable energy of unity. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped onto the stage with a new understanding. He was not there just representing himself, but everyone who fought for a dignified space. Today, we are here to listen and learn from one another. Our differences do not divide us. They enrich us, he said, feeling courage flow through his words. Looking out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces, people who had once hesitated to open up, now smiling and engaging in the activities. Caleb realized that true wealth was not just in external achievements, but in the connections he was creating among people. As the day went on, he heard moving stories, saw friendships forming, and resistance dissipating. Each person who spoke brought a new perspective, and Caleb felt grateful to be part of that moment. He was learning that success was deeper than any material wealth. It was about the ability to make a difference in the lives of others. At the end of the event, Caleb looked at Donna Marlene, who was enthusiastically applauding. He knew that without her and the friends who had been part of that journey, he would not have succeeded. He felt a wave of gratitude. He had overcome his fears, learned to trust himself more, and valued the support of others. The journey was just beginning, but he was more prepared than ever. From that day on, Caleb not only applied the lessons he learned, but also became an active advocate for inclusion and respect. He had faced his inner conflicts and, in doing so, found a greater purpose. The fight was still ongoing, but now he knew he was not alone. With each step, he felt stronger and more determined to move forward, trusting that together they could transform their community into a place where everyone could thrive. Caleb was about to face his greatest challenge. The community event he had organized had been a success, but now, a new test of his determination had arisen. During a council meeting, a group of influential members, who had always opposed the idea of inclusion, decided it was time to dismantle what he had built. They argued that diversity was a distraction and that the focus should be solely on efficiency and order. Their words cut to Caleb's heart and threatened to destabilize everything he had fought for. Donna Marlene, always by his side, noticed the tension on Caleb's face. She knew he felt pressured and that insecurity threatened to resurface. "You cannot let them make you doubt yourself," she said firmly. "Remember what you have achieved so far. Your voice matters, and you must use it." On the morning of the meeting, as he prepared to speak, Caleb felt a knot in his stomach. He looked at the group before him, some familiar faces and others that always seemed skeptical. But when he looked at Donna Marlene in the audience, he felt a wave of courage. He remembered the event, the stories shared, the connections formed. That was what he needed to bring into that room. When it was his turn to speak, he took a deep breath. "I am here to remind all of us that the true strength of a community is not found in uniformity, but in diversity. Each of us brings something unique, and that makes us richer. We should not fear our differences, but rather celebrate them." His words echoed in the hall, and he saw some heads nodding, but also noticed looks of disdain from his opponents. Then, One of the council members stood up, interrupting him. "Caleb, you talk about diversity as if it could solve all problems. What will you say to those who believe it only brings confusion? What do you have to offer that is concrete?" The question hung in the air like a sharp sword. Caleb hesitated, but Donna Marlene's voice resonated in his mind. He remembered the strength he had found by opening up to the people around him. "I offer you an invitation," he said more firmly. "An invitation to see what has already happened in our community. The event we held was not just a gathering, it was a demonstration of what we can achieve together. Inclusion is not a distraction, but a pathway to creative and innovative solutions." He looked directly into the eyes of the council member who had challenged him. When people feel heard, they become more engaged. They bring their ideas, their solutions, and that, my friends, is what makes us stronger. Caleb felt the energy in the room shift. Some people were starting to lean forward, interested in what he had to say, but the council member did not give up. And what if that doesn't work? What if you are just creating a space for more conflict? The room tensed, and Caleb felt the weight of doubt on his shoulders, but he could not back down. He needed to believe in what he was advocating. "I understand the fear," Caleb replied, his voice more confident now. "I was afraid too, afraid of not being heard, afraid of failing. But along this journey, I learned that failure is just a part of growth. When we allow ourselves to fail, we have the chance to start over, to learn together. If we don't try, we will never know." The room was silent, and Caleb realized he had reached a crucial point. He continued, "The true wealth of a community is not just in what we achieve, but in the relationships we build. And if we are willing to listen and learn from each other, we can turn our challenges into opportunities." Donna Marlene smiled, and he saw faces around him beginning to light up. He had found his voice, and he was using it to unite, not to divide. He was not alone. His community was there with him. At the end of the meeting, one of the members who had previously opposed him raised his hand. "I think we need to reconsider our approaches. We may not have all the answers, but perhaps it is time to try something different." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Caleb felt a wave of relief and hope. In that moment, he realized that the fight for inclusion was not just about winning debates, but about creating a space where every voice could be heard. He had overcome his own fears and, in doing so, helped to open doors for others. The journey was far from over, but he knew he had taken a significant step. The friendship he formed with Donna Marlene and others had solidified even more. Together, they could face any challenge that arose. Caleb smiled, not just for having won the battle of that meeting, but for discovering the strength that had always been within him. True transformation was not just about changing others' mindsets, but about believing he could make a difference. And so he moved forward, stronger and more determined than ever, ready to continue his journey of inclusion and unity. After the meeting, the atmosphere in the community began to change. Caleb felt a mix of relief and hope. The words he had spoken still echoed in his mind. He knew that the fight for inclusion was far from over, but a new chapter was opening. The people who had once been skeptical now seemed more willing to listen. There was space for dialogue, and that was a positive sign. In the following days, Caleb received messages of support from several people who had attended the event. Some shared stories about how inclusion had impacted their lives. One mother, for instance, wrote about how her daughter felt welcomed for the first time in a community space. These messages warmed Caleb's heart and made him feel that his efforts were worth it. Mrs. Marlene became an even closer confidant. They met frequently to discuss ideas and plan new events to continue promoting inclusion. "You managed to touch people's hearts, Caleb," she said in one of those meetings. "And now, we need to keep that flame alive. Change starts with small steps." He agreed, feeling that together they were shaping something bigger than just an idea. The community began to mobilize. New discussion groups were formed where people could share their experiences and perspectives. Caleb realized that diversity was not just an abstract concept, but something that could be lived out in daily life. He saw people coming together, talking, and learning from one another. The differences that had once been seen as barriers were now being celebrated. However, not everything was easy. Some council members still expressed resistance. They continued to argue that certain changes could destabilize the established order. In one of the subsequent meetings, an opponent stood up again, but this time, instead of challenging, he seemed more confused. "How can we ensure that this diversity doesn't lead to more conflicts?" he asked, his voice laden with uncertainty. Caleb took a deep breath and remembered how he had felt at the first meeting, confronted and insecure. "The issue isn't about eliminating conflicts," he began. "The issue is how we handle them. Instead of fearing them, we should embrace them as opportunities for growth. Each conflict is a chance to learn more about each other and about ourselves. If we don't open space for conversation, we won't be able to move forward." He saw some heads nodding, and that gave him courage. With each new meeting, more people joined the cause. Caleb began to realize that instead of fighting against a tide of opposition, he was actually helping to create a new current. The community was transforming into a space where voices were heard and respected. The stories shared during the gatherings became bridges to new friendships and collaborations. One day, while walking through the community park, Caleb came across a group of children playing together. Some were from different backgrounds and cultures, but they were united in laughter and play. He paused for a moment, observing the scene. It was a powerful reminder that inclusion was not just about adults and formal meetings. It was about the future generations growing up in a more welcoming environment. "Look, Caleb," said Mrs. Marlene, joining him. "This is what we are building. A future where children don't have to fight for what you fought for. They already start with a foundation of friendship and respect." Caleb smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. He knew there was still much work to be done, but every small step counted. In the weeks that followed, the community began planning a new event, this time focusing on celebrating differences. It would be a cultural fair where each group could share their traditions and customs. Caleb felt excited and hopeful. He knew that despite the challenges, the journey for inclusion was just beginning. And more importantly, he was not alone. The community was by his side, more united and stronger than ever. Caleb looked around and saw potential in every face surrounding him. They were ready to come together and make a difference. He had found his voice, and now, more than ever, he was determined to use it to build a better future. The transformation he desired was not just a dream, but a reality being built day by day. Caleb watched the community transform before his eyes. The cultural fair they had planned was about to take place, and the anticipation in the air was palpable. He walked through the park, where children and adults worked together to set up booths and prepare presentations. Every detail reflected the diversity that was now being celebrated, and he felt immense pride in having contributed to this moment. As he helped organize things, Caleb reflected on his journey. He remembered how he had started, insecure and hesitant, facing resistance from some council members. However, each conversation, each shared story, had been a step toward building something greater. He realized that, more than just promoting inclusion, he had found a purpose that brought new meaning to his life. "Caleb." Donna Marlene's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She approached him, smiling. "Look at this. People are coming together in a way I never thought possible." He followed her gaze and saw mixed groups of different ages and backgrounds, laughing and having fun. It was a scene he had dreamed of, and now it was becoming a reality. Throughout the event, Caleb saw not only the joy on people's faces but also a new understanding emerging. Those who had once been skeptical were now sharing their own stories, and the bonds being formed were deep and meaningful. He realized that the resistance he had faced was not just an obstacle, but an opportunity to grow and learn. He had transformed in this process, becoming a stronger and more empathetic leader. At the end of the fair, as everyone gathered for a final presentation, Caleb felt a wave of emotion. He stood up and, with a firm voice, shared a few words. Today, we celebrate not only diversity, but also the courage to come together. Each of us has a story, and every story matters. Let's carry this energy into the future, always remembering that inclusion starts with respect and friendship. The applause echoed through the park, and Caleb saw tears of joy in the eyes of many people. He knew that this moment was just the beginning. The struggle for inclusion and mutual understanding would continue, but now there was a solid foundation of support and unity. He had learned that true success was not just winning a battle, but building a path where everyone could walk together. As he walked home, Caleb felt a new sense of enthusiasm. He had found his place in the community and, more importantly, had created a space where others could find themselves too. He realized that, although challenges lay ahead, every small step counted. What had started as a solitary struggle had now transformed into a collective movement. Caleb smiled to himself, thinking about all the lessons he had learned. Life is made of new beginnings, and each new beginning brings the chance to do better, to love more, and to include everyone. He committed to continuing this journey, not just for himself, but for all those still fighting for a voice and space. And so, Caleb's story became a powerful lesson in overcoming and inclusion. He knew that by sharing his experiences and listening to others, together they could build a brighter future. Now, he invited everyone to join this journey, to share their own stories, and to contribute to a more welcoming community. After all, transformation begins with a simple gesture of friendship and understanding. If you also believe in the power of inclusion and the changes that small actions can bring, share your experiences or reflections. Together, we can make a difference, and your voice is essential. Like and subscribe to continue receiving stories that inspire and promote unity. The time to act is now. Now we want to know, what moment in this story touched you the most? Please comment below, as your opinion is very important to us. And if this story inspired you, share it with friends and family who might also be moved. Together, we can spread stories of overcoming, unity, and belonging. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive more stories like this that reflect the essence of human relationships. If you liked it, leave a like so we know we're on the right track. Thank you for being here, and until the next story that will touch your heart.